January 6th was a disgrace. American citizens attacked their own government. They used terrorism to try to stop a specific piece of domestic business they did not like. Fellow Americans beat and bloodied our own police. They stormed the Senate floor. They tried to hunt down the Speaker of the House. They built a gallows and chanted about murdering the Vice President. They did this because they'd been fed wild falsehoods by the most powerful man on earth. Because he was angry he'd lost an election. Former President Trump's actions preceded the riot were a disgraceful dereliction of duty.
Therefore, I am endorsing Donald J. Trump. You know, the one thing we cut off there, and maybe it's not fair to Mitch, is that at the end of right after that, he broke into a rousing tune, had a band of it. Happy Days Are Here Again. Mm-hmm. It was like the 32 convention. Mm-hmm. I couldn't believe it. But yeah. Also, a little discordant, you know. Song didn't go with the message, but, you know, that's Mitch.
Mitch McConnell there, that was in 2021. That was about a month after January 6th, blaming Donald Trump for the insurrection, the attack on the Capitol squarely. Yesterday, Mitch McConnell endorsed Donald Trump for president.
Who saw that coming?
We also should add in that Donald Trump has relentlessly attacked in a racist way Mitch McConnell's wife. But he says, you know what? I have said for a long time that I will endorse whoever the nominee is, even if it's the guy I blame for an attempted coup against the United States government.
Exactly. You know, here's the thing, okay? We say a lot of bad things sometimes about Ted Cruz here. But let me once say, there is a difference between Mitch McConnell and Ted Cruz. All right? If Donald Trump had ever attacked Ted Cruz's wife, ever called her ugly, ever struck out at her in the most personal of terms, that is Texas tough right there.
He's a real man. Yeah.
That's a line.
No BS.
You can't cross that.
Cross that line with Ted. No. You know what? You might as well have crossed the Rio Grande, my friend.
On the way to Cancun?
Yeah, that would not have watched.
You can't look. If you call Senator Cruz's wife ugly or suggested Senator Cruz's father assassinated JFK,
yes,
he won't support you at least for a few months. He won't do it.
At least not at the convention.
No, he'll vote your conscience at the convention and then a few months later do a phone bank for Donald Trump and leading to.
Well, I guess Lindsey Graham is
another. Yeah.
There's a guy though, like if he would. I mean, that guy.
Profile and courage.
Mr. Spine.
Go on the floor.
Enough is enough. I'm out.
Yeah, I'm out. And then three rednecks and a hound dog chasing him around Reagan National, and he's like, I'm in.
It's not like somebody doxed him and put his cell phone up.
Yeah, it's not like Trump put his cell phone up there.
I think we need a compilation. It might start with Chris Christie in the McDonald's episode.
On McConnell, though, I will say the two moments that led to Donald Trump's comeback post-January 6th. One is House Speaker McCarthy, soon to be wanting to be Speaker McCarthy, heading to Mar-a-Lago and posing for a photo, beginning that rehabilitation tour. The other is McConnell choosing not to try to convict Trump in that second trial. First of all, pushing it until after the inauguration, having it in February, believing things would cool off, voting to acquit himself. And had he voted to convict and whipped others to do so, Trump wouldn't have been able to run for office again. McConnell chose not to do that. Here we have. That opened the door for the Trump.
Well, I will say there are a lot of things that Mitch did that we saluted on this show, and he stood up. He stood up to Trump at very important times, and yet at the end, if you want to take this endorsement at the end of his career, basically, or if you want to take what happened at the end of that process, where there really was a question, could Mitch McConnell have gotten enough Republicans to convict Donald Trump in that impeachment proceeding? He made the call, we'll let the courts play it out. Yeah. And we see more of where that's led us, George.
Yeah.
I mean, part of being in leadership is showing some leadership and at least attempting to do what you think is right. I mean, we all have political minds. We talk a lot about strategy, but there's also just such a thing as right and wrong. And at the end of the day, it sounds like a lot of people have forgotten why you go to Washington. It's supposed to be to serve Americans. It's supposed to be a public servant. And this just looks like it's about power. It's shameless. Yeah. And Americans understand that. They see that that's part of why so many voters are deeply demoralized and cynical about this process at this point.
And it's shameless, but it's also bizarre. I mean, here's a man. How old is Mitch McConnell?
Old enough that it doesn't matter.
Old enough
like
that exactly.
I'm old enough that it doesn't matter.
That's right. I mean, why not go out and just say what you think? And he did say what he thought on that for that brief shining moment on February 13, 2021, where he said not only the stuff that we just saw on tape. He said there's a criminal law in this country. He was endorsing Jack Smith before Jack Smith was even appointed. He was saying that the man was a criminal, that he did cause these people to engage in violence on the Hill, and that one of the remedies could be criminal prosecution. And so where is he today? And it's for what? He's done.
Well, for what? And I'm sorry, I'm just going to ask. And I say this of Cruz, I say it of Lindsey, I say it of all of them, I say it of just all the people Trump insulted. What man? I ask that as a man, I'd say, or woman. But as a man, I said, what man would put up with it? I had a very powerful Republican slander a friend of mine. 20 years later, he pulls me aside before his speech and begs me to stop. And he says, Jesus Christ, Joe, it's been 20 years. It's been 20 years. So you shouldn't have said that about my friend. It's going to be 20 more years. I mean, that's what we would all do. Well, except for my friends.
But even...
No, but hold on, except for my friends. When Donald Trump said I was a murderer and I should be executed, a lot of them voted for Donald Trump. But the rest of us here... But that even raises a question, Willie. What is it about Donald Trump?
It's his brilliance.
People can insult someone's wife or a husband. In Mitch McConnell's case, continue racist slurs against his wife. Yeah. And they're just fine with it. I'm not even looking at Donald Trump there.
Yeah.
I'm looking at these people. I'm looking at my former friends. They're like, oh yeah, he called you a murderer, but I'm voting for him anyway. Regulations. You know they're going to be down on this front.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, well, you and I have talked about this on and off the air. What are those looks in the mirror like in the morning or at night for Lindsey Graham or for Ted Cruz or any of those guys? If you have any personal pride, not talking about politics here, if you have any personal pride, how do you do it? How do you swallow all that down and then go out and support the guy who's attacked you relentlessly? I mean, he attacks Lindsey Graham in his home state during the primaries. The crowd's booing Lindsey Graham while Lindsey stands there and he mocks them, takes them for their support for granted, and he should, because there's nothing he could do to them that they wouldn't fall in line anyway. But it's again, not politics. It's as a person who has personal pride. How do you do it? I don't know.
Lindsey's first words are, hey, y'all. My first two words, if somebody did that to me, would be markedly different. And I don't think I'm outside of the norm here, Lemire. Again, this is so bizarre. I want to underline again, Mitch McConnell insulted repeatedly, said this guy tried to basically destroy American democracy, has watched his wife attacked with racist screeds repeatedly. And he said, I endorse Donald Trump.
It's so deeply cynical, and it's based all out of fear of Trump. And McConnell, of all people, who has announced he's stepping down from leadership, he's not going to run again. He would seem to be a person who doesn't have to do this. And yes, he does want Republicans to have a majority in the Senate again, even if he's not going to be the leader there.
Trump took that from him.
Of course he did.
Twice.
Yes, twice.
He would have been Senate majority leader over the past 4 years, except for one person. and one person alive.
The two men have not spoken in years, and yet McConnell still backs us. And he defended it by saying yesterday that, well, in February 2021, just days after that speech, I said I would back whoever the Republican nominee was. And that, of course, became because he's putting party before country. That's what he's doing. And party before personal pride, too.
But, George, that's an old custom that I understand when it's George H.W. Bush or Ronald Reagan or John McCain or pick your Mitt Romney, whoever it is, you
Bob
follow
Dole or George H.W. Bush.
Right, but you've said
stakes not that high.
You said this is a man who may face criminal prosecution because he led an attempted coup against the government. So maybe you could change the tradition just for this one case.
Yeah, and it's not just doing it for the country. If he only cared about the Republican Party, he would have spoken out and said we've got to get rid of Trump long ago. Even if he wanted to sacrifice himself just for his party, why not do that?
November rematch between Joe Biden and Donald Trump essentially set this morning following Nikki Haley's decision to drop out of the 2024 presidential race. Haley did not endorse Donald Trump in her speech yesterday. One big question is now, though, where will her supporters go? Haley says that is up to Donald Trump.
It is now up to Donald Trump to earn the votes of those in our party and beyond it who did not support him. And I hope he does that. At its best, politics is about bringing people into your cause, not turning them away. And our conservative cause badly needs more people. This is now his time for choosing.
How did he choose?
That was nice outreach.
No, it's very nice.
Yeah. Let's say this is a time you can grow your base. Well, Donald Trump responded during Haley's speech while she was saying that with this on Truth Social, quote, Haley got trounced in record-setting fashion. He then invited her supporters to join the MAGA movement. It's worth noting Trump previously said anyone who contributes to Haley's campaign would be, quote, permanently barred from the MAGA camp. Meanwhile, President Biden welcomed Haley's supporters into the fold, writing in a statement, Donald Trump made it clear he does not want Nikki Haley's supporters. I want to be clear. There is a place for them in my campaign. I hope and believe we can find common ground. A Biden campaign official told NBC News the finance teams for Biden and the Democratic National Committee recently have been reaching out to Haley's donors. Additionally, the Biden campaign has been studying Haley's performance in the primaries, watching those more moderate and independent voters who say they will never vote for Donald Trump. On Super Tuesday, the Biden campaign focused on where those voters are located to target them, potentially persuade them to vote blue this November. It was a pretty sizable margin, depending on the state, not only that voted for Nikki Haley. We talked through some of those numbers up to, obviously, she won Vermont, but even in places she lost 20, 30, 40% of Republican voters, and a big percentage of those saying they will never vote for Donald Trump. So will they go out and vote for Joe Biden? Will they stay home? That's what's up in the air right now.
I mean, Sam, it really, if you're an incumbent, Donald Trump basically is a three-time incumbent now, a bleak message, losing 20%, 30%, 40% of primary voters before you go into a general election. And yet the media seemed transfixed over the uncommitted in Michigan or Wisconsin or whatever. The numbers were about the same as Barack Obama before he trounced Mitt Romney. What do you make of how each of these candidates go into the general election?
I mean, I think they each have their own set of vulnerabilities, right? Trump, it's fairly obvious nothing's really changed in terms of the script. He does very little to expand his coalition, although his team would say, hey, we're trying to reach out to black, Hispanic voters. We're trying to reach out to union workers. But more or less stylistically, Trump is not going to soften the edges. He'll assume that Republicans will go back home, and he'll do very little to try to earn over those people who gravitated to Nikki Haley because they were frustrated with his presidency or just because they were repulsed by how it ended. With Biden, it's a different case. For him, there's a lot of angst among the progressive base. I think that's fair to say. I think there's a lot of angst over his handling of the Israel-Hamas war. But he has made and will continue to make overtures to expand towards those Nikki Haley voters. And he is, as we've seen in the past couple weeks, trying to soften his approach to the war in Gaza in an effort to round out his support among the base. And I just think it's stylistically, it's like totally different presidents going at it. And so, you know, it's to be seen how the coalitions are built.
So Biden has to bring voters home. He needs to bring young voters home. He needs to bring people of color home that may have faded maybe 10, 15% there. Obviously, Israel, Gaza is having an impact. What does Joe Biden need to do between now and Labor Day to start consolidating that base?
I've thought a lot about this. I've been traveling, talking to voters in several states. And it's clear that he needs to be much more visible. He needs to be talking not only about his victories, and he's got a lot of accomplishments to discuss, but also telling voters he understands their frustration, he understands their weariness, he understands that for some of them the economy is not so great right now. The rent is high, wages still haven't caught up with inflation. He needs to speak to that. People are still paying a lot of money in student loans. If you're a younger American, we've talked about this on the show, if you're under 40, 45 years old, you're starting to wonder, can I afford to have kids? Can I afford to buy that house? So he's got to really speak to those concerns. And then, of course, he's got to be able to speak even more movingly about the plight of Palestinians, I believe. And what he's going to do to ensure that their human rights are protected alongside Israelis. And I think he's started to do that, but he needs to be louder.
Right.
And the president certainly
louder.
has an opportunity to do that tonight in the State of the Union. He's actually spoken very little about the war in Gaza since those initial weeks of the conflict. I think that'll change tonight as he tries to frame exactly what's going on there. But reports out of this morning that ceasefire talks broken down there in Cairo, so they may not get that in place for Ramadan as they had hoped. George, we've seen President, he's been on the road a little bit more lately. He's talking to the media a little bit more. They know that tonight's also a moment to try to show his vitality for the job. There's been questions about that. We see the polls about his age. And I think tonight, certainly he'll draw contrasts with Donald Trump, whether or not he mentions Trump by name. But he also needs to make a positive case for the next 4 years. And that's something that some Democrats say he hasn't really done. How would you recommend it?
Well, I just think, I agree with everything Laura said. He's got to be empathetic. He's got to be himself. I think at the end of the day, he doesn't have to do a hard sell. He does have to get out there. He just has to be normal. And the reason that's all he really has to do is Trump won in 2016 because Hillary was the issue. Trump lost in 2020 because Trump was the issue. And in 2024, Trump will lose again because he will be the issue. He will make himself the issue. He cannot help but make himself the issue. And what Biden needs to do is just basically say, that guy's crazy. He doesn't have to refer to him by name. He just has to say, the guy's nuts. Let's be normal, America. That's the theme of this campaign, I think.
To that point, Joe, Wall Street Journal op-ed page, the top, GOP's third gamble on Trump. Republicans are elevating the one man who could lose to Biden, getting at exactly what George is saying, that Biden may just step back and let Donald Trump do his thing.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, it's very interesting. Let's be normal. The original lyrics to Prince's Let's Go Crazy.
Oh, wow.
Just the last second of the studio, he switched it. He said, I think this may have a bit more of an edge.
It was a good tweak.
It probably was.
Yeah.
Let's Go Crazy. A little better dance. Hard to dance. Let's be normal.
Let's go right to the White House. Joining us now, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. Karine, it's good to see you this morning.
It's good to see you. I was going to say, I don't think you guys need me. I was just listening to the commentary. I don't think you guys need me this morning. But it's good to be on.
Well, we'll ask you anyway, Karine. So let's talk about that contrast that you seek to draw. Clearly, it's been a two-man race for some time now, but almost officially now after Super Tuesday that it is going to be Donald Trump as the Republican nominee versus the president. So how will you draw a contrast while talking about your own record with your opponent?
Well, again, Willie, good to see you, and thank you so much for having me. Look, tonight is obviously a very important night. The president's looking forward to not just being in front of Congress, but talking directly to the American people. Just think about it. He'll be talking to folks who are sitting on their couches, sitting around the kitchen table, and letting them know how he sees the vision for our country, talking about how he's going to build on these accomplishments that has delivered gains for the American families. Look, he's also going to talk about who he stands for. And if you think about this, middle class over tax giveaways for the rich, right? You think about lowering costs over greed, corporate greed. If you think about women's health care over these extreme bans that we have been seeing across the country, and on abortion and on IVF as well. When you think about American democracy, standing up for that over the hateful, violent rhetoric and the attack of our rule of law that we have been seeing. If you think about standing for patients over big pharma. So you're going to see the president lay that all out. Don't want to get too far ahead of him, but that's how he's going to do the contrast here. It's going to be important for the American people as he knows it and understands it. And as you all have been talking about it this morning, to hear directly from him on his vision, what he has done in the last 3 years. He's done more in the last 3 years, Willie, than most presidents have been able to do in their in their 2 terms. And so that is going to be important for the president tonight.
Karine, good morning. It's Jonathan. You just laid out what he's going to say about what he's accomplished already, but tell us a little bit more about what he's going to promise for the future. The vision for a second term. I know you guys are putting out some information about potentially raising corporate tax rates. Tell us a little bit about that, corporate tax rates, tax hikes on the rich. But what else? Yeah. How is President Biden going to sell what the next 4 years are going to look like?
So look, and as you talk about corporate tax rate, making sure we're standing up for the middle class family, that's always something that the president has talked about. And you think about the economy, growing an economy from the bottom up, middle out, right? Making sure that the middle class is not forgotten, making sure that communities that feel that they've been left behind are not. And that's what you've seen the president do the first 3 years. Look, here's what I would say. When we talk about 14 million jobs created, unemployment under 4%, wages have gone up, that did not happen by accident, right? That happened because of this president's policies. And he wants to continue that over the next, obviously, several months going into the second term, right? He wants to continue delivering those gains for the American people. Look, there's drug prices, right? We got to make sure that seniors aren't paying thousands of dollars a month, right? That's why the inflation, I heard somebody talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. Let's not forget what that was able to do. It allowed Medicare to negotiate with Big Pharma, right? It allowed to make sure that insulin was capped at $35 for seniors. All of those things we need to continue, and those historic pieces of legislation that obviously are now law, we have to implement them. We have to protect them because you have Republicans that want to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. The president wants to continue that process. There are 46,000 projects, infrastructure projects, that came out of the bipartisan infrastructure law. So we got to continue that, get those projects going. So, and let's not forget, he's going to talk about his unity agenda. There are issues that both sides care about. You know, ending cancer, fighting for veteran families. Those are important, making sure we're getting fentanyl out of our communities. So those are issues that both sides care about. The president has been able to get more than 400 bills passed and signed more than 400 bills that have been bipartisan. So you're going to hear him talk about all of those things tonight as well.
Karine, 2 of the issues that are burning in this country, among others, is the right of women to choose and where we are in terms of the racial gaps in this country. The president has taken a stern position of pro-choice, and he's made some deep inroads, really, in closing. I think we have the closing of the race gap between blacks and whites is now shrunk more than it has in the last few decades. Black unemployment record low. I remember last year at the State of the Union, he had the parents of Tyree Nichols, who was a concern for us at that time, who'd been beaten to death by police. Will he address women and women's rights directly, and the continued fight in the black community, where some are saying that blacks have become more, let's say, less than enthusiastic about his campaign, even though I know this is not a campaign address.
No, you're exactly right. Thank you so much for the question, Reverend. Look, you're going to hear the president address how our democracy is under attack, how our freedoms are certainly under attack. He's going to speak to what we've been seeing across the country as it relates to women's health care and the radical, extreme bills that we're seeing on abortion, on IVF. You're going to hear the president be very loud and clear about that. And we know that voting rights is an issue here that the president has spoken to, has been spoken to very clearly. He even took an executive action very early on in his administration to see what we can do on the federal level to deal with, to make it easier for folks to vote. So you'll hear him certainly lean into that as well tonight. Look, it is important. It is important, we believe, that as the president, let's not forget, when he first decided to run in 2019, he talked about the soul of this nation and really fighting for the soul of America. That didn't end with the president being elected, obviously, in 2020. That continues. That continues. And it is important for this president to continue to talk about our freedoms and how they are under attack. They are. In extreme ways by extreme Republicans. And so he's going to continue. You're going to see whose side he's on. He's side of the American people. He's going to continue to fight for the American people. And tonight it's going to be a really important night to hear directly from the president on these critical issues tonight.
And we will do that about 14 hours from now
yes.
on Capitol Hill. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. Karine, thanks so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Willie. Appreciate it.
Following a series of violent attacks in New York City subways, Governor Kathy Hochul says she is now sending the National Guard and state police to patrol the country's largest public transit system. She has. In just the past week, an MTA conductor was struck in the head with a glass bottle. A 64-year-old man was kicked onto the tracks at Penn Station, and a man needed 4 stitches after another passenger slashed him with a box cutter. Joining us now is the Democratic governor of New York, Kathy Hochul. Governor, thanks for being with us.
First of all, look at the headlines. The newspaper of record, as Reverend Al likes to say for Morning Joe, the New York Post, boots underground, and then the Daily News, soldiers in the subway.
So, Governor, no governor takes lightly calling up National Guard troops and sending them potentially into harm's way. What went into your decision to send National Guard and state troopers down into the New York City subway?
I want to send reinforcements to the mayor of New York, who has primary responsibility for policing the subways. But all of us know who've been on the subways are vast. And we have seen a number of crimes, again, not statistically significant, but psychologically significant. And I want more people to go on the subways.
Governor, by the way, thank you for saying that, because, you know, people will say, oh, crime's at a 50-year low and everything's wonderful. And then Willie will say, well, why is it that all of my friends say don't go on the subway? Or I go into a CVS store and the toothpaste is behind plastic. So thank you. It's not just numbers on the page. No. It's psychologically, do New Yorkers feel safe?
That is exactly what we're trying to fight here. I can show you all the statistics in the world that say you should feel safe because the numbers are better. But you're the mom on the subway with your baby in a stroller. You're the parent putting your kid on the subway to go to high school. You're that senior citizen going to a doctor appointment. If you're anxious that I'm the governor of the state of New York, I'm concerned about it. And if you feel better walking past someone in a uniform to make sure that someone doesn't bring a knife or a gun on the subway, then that's exactly why I did it. I want to change the psychology around crime in New York City because we are the safest big city in America.
Right.
I want people on the subways. It is safe, but I'm going to make sure people feel safe.
It is far and away the best way to get around New York. It's not even close. It always has been. Still ride the subway all the time, one train. But I was saying to you in the break that over the last couple of years, you do notice that, Rev, when we take the subway, you'd always stand up on the yellow line and look over to see if the train was coming. Everybody stands back. They're either against the back wall or they're against the post because of these stories we hear about getting pushed in front of a train. It doesn't happen a lot statistically, but it does happen. So I guess the question for me is, this is the response to a problem, but what about the root of the problem? Why is there a little uptick in subway crime? Why are we seeing some of this?
We're still not at full capacity. We're about 4 million passengers a day. It's usually 6 or 7. I think when there's trains that are a little bit emptier, people feel more at ease to interact with others, sometimes in a negative way, sometimes in a violent way. So when I can get capacity up there, we get the trains full again, the platforms full again, then crime does go down, because that's why we saw such a spike during the pandemic. There were not many people on it, and the criminals feel at ease that no one's watching it. But they are watching. Also, part of my plan is every single subway train is now going to have cameras on it. That was not the case. I sped up the process, and now even our conductors' booths will now have cameras in there, because we don't know who the perpetrator is of the person who slit the neck of a conductor just a week and a half ago. I talked to the doctor who saved his life. What a great guy to be on the train and go save the life of a conductor. But that is not the norm, and I don't want people to think that that is going to be normalized on the subways of the state of New York. We're going to make sure we take back our subways, make you feel safe again. No stop and frisk. This is not punitive. This is more of a deterrent.
So the F train, my local. But your move here has received some applause from perhaps unlucky sources. Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas cheered this. And it has some pushback from civil liberty groups here in New York City who worry about the idea of the National Guard being on the subway. So can you explain to us a little more just exactly what their purview is?
Wait, why do they worry about it? I'm confused.
Just the idea of that they don't think that the National Guard soldiers should be on the subway. That's their argument.
Why?
Because they think that's a step too far. They don't think that's necessary.
Too far to what? Not necessary for what? I don't understand.
Well, you'll have to take it up with them, Joe. I'm just relaying it here to the governor.
I'm Tom Hanks in Big. I don't understand. I don't understand.
I think there's a sense among some that they believe that soldiers should have places not on New York City streets of America or subways of an American city. But the governor obviously has made that decision. Can you tell us a little bit more about what their purview will be? How many soldiers? How long? What will their jurisdiction be? How do they work with the NYPD and Transit Police?
In coordination with the NYPD, as I said, they're primary. This is their job. They're to protect the subways. But they need help right now. So I'll give them help as long as help is needed. I have 1,000 individuals. I don't have to keep them there long. I may keep them there a long time. I'm not going to tell the criminals the day I'm stopping this, because then they'll be back the next day. That's not a good crime prevention strategy. But also to the naysayers. I'm reading an article that people are saying, well, Hochul's saying is one of my plans that if you've committed a crime on the subway, you've harmed another passenger or conductor, you should not be able to take the subway again, right? I don't want to sit next to someone who just, harmed someone last year and got out. So, but people are saying I'm going to be harassing people and going to be stopping. That is not the objective at all. I'm here to protect people, particularly people in communities of color who are riding the subways in high proportion because they don't have the luxury vehicles. They're getting to their low-wage jobs. I want them to be safe. That's why I'm doing this. So people criticize everything we do. Get in line. I say as the governor of New York, they're always saying something. But all I know is my job is to protect the people of this state, and I'll do it. And I'm also going to demonstrate that Democrats fight crime as well. So this narrative that Republicans have said and hijacked the story that we're soft on crime, that we defund the police. No. We care about civil liberties. We don't want over-policing. We want to make sure the police operate within certain restraints, protect our citizens' rights. But by God, I'm going to protect their lives and protect their sense of safety and security here in the city of New York.
All right, let's bring in House Minority Leader, Democratic Congressman Hakeem Jeffries of New York. Leader Jeffries, thanks for being with us this morning. A lot to talk to you about. Let's start there with some of the cuts proposed in this funding bill. Do you think DOJ, ATF, FBI, EPA, do you think we'll see those cuts in the end?
Well, we fought hard to avoid the type of dramatic cuts that the extreme MAGA Republicans wanted to visit on the DOJ, the FBI, the ATF, whose primary job is to try to confront the massive amount of guns that are flooding our communities and resulting in people being killed in classrooms, in movie theaters, and in malls. The type of so-called cuts that Speaker Johnson is talking about were largely cosmetic in nature compared to what they wanted to do if they had their way, which was to cut hundreds of millions of dollars, if you can believe it, from the Department of Justice or the FBI or other law enforcement agencies.
So Leader Jeffries, do they not understand that these are the very agencies that crack down on drug cartels? These are the very agencies that protect Americans from terrorists, whether we're talking about terrorist attacks in shopping malls, whether we're talking about terrorist attacks in train stations, whether we're talking about terrorist attacks in airports. Do they not understand that? Are they too stupid to understand that? Or are they just fine with it because Donald Trump wants that? It's just like southern border, I guess. Like Donald Trump says, let fentanyl flood across the southern border for another year and blame it on me. So these people are saying, let hijackers have their way, let drug cartels have their way in the United States because, well, Donald Trump told us to do it. Is that how Congress runs now?
Well, it seems to be the case in terms of whenever one is trying to figure out how to explain the unexplainable, the simple answer is always that when the low-energy MAGA king, Donald Trump, says jump, the extreme MAGA Republicans in the House of Representatives respond, how high? That's the reason why they continue to block a bipartisan, comprehensive border security bill necessary to stand with our democratic allies, whether that's in Ukraine or Israel or the Indo-Pacific, certainly in the midst of the defense of democracy and freedom and truth against authoritarianism, tyranny, and propaganda. We are continuing to see the Republicans do the bidding of Donald Trump and undermine the best interests of the United States of America.
So, Leader, what is it like listening to these Republicans carp year after year after year about the need to pass a tough border security bill, and then a conservative like James Lankford gets together with Democrats in the House and the Senate, gets together with Republicans in the Senate, gets together with the president, and they come up with the toughest border security bill ever, and Mike Johnson and MAGA extremists kill it?
We clearly have a broken immigration system and real challenges at the border. And under the leadership of President Biden, partnering with House Democrats and Senate Democrats, and, of course, Republican senators like Lankford, we are ready, willing, and able to try to find a way forward to establish a safe and strong, secure, and humane border while trying to also, at the same time, find legal pathways towards citizenship so we can continue to be a thriving nation of immigrants. That's a competitive advantage for us. But again, the Republicans don't seem interested in solving problems on behalf of hard-working American taxpayers. We need less chaos in Washington, D.C., more common sense. Common sense suggests that we have to address these challenges in a bipartisan way. We are willing to continue to do that. We just need partners on the other side of the aisle.
Leader Jeffries, we just had the governor of New York here talking about crime in the subways, and I know it's been brought out all over the country that some migrants have engaged in crime, even though I think it's been blown way out of the data that we've seen. But even in light of that hype, you're telling me that with many concessions to the Republicans to the border control bill, that in many cases they had represented and they had written, that your conversations with Speaker Johnson dramatically changed when Donald Trump said, no, don't vote for the bill, even though the bill had many of us questioning it and saying it was given too much to the Republicans. They wouldn't vote for their own bill under the orders of their presidential nominee to be Donald Trump.
Well, this is a group right now in terms of the extreme MAGA Republicans where far too often facts don't matter, hypocrisy is not a constraint to their behavior, and they believe that shamelessness is a superpower. And we've seen it on issue after issue after issue. We are going to continue to do everything we can to put people over politics. And from the very beginning of this Congress, we've said as House Democrats that we will find bipartisan common ground with our Republican colleagues on any issue, whenever and wherever possible, in order to make life better for the American people. Joe Biden has led in that way. Joe Biden is going to continue to work toward building a healthy economy, lower costs, better paying jobs, safer communities, address the challenges at the border. But in a context of divided government, we need traditional Republicans to step up, work with us, and reject the MAGA extremism that is poisoning the Republican Party.
Show the clips of January 6th again. That is right there. That's Donald Trump's America. That's Donald Trump's riot. that was what Donald Trump wanted. He called them to Washington. He said, come on January the 6th. It will be wild. And then he gave a speech telling them they had to go up to the Capitol. Couldn't be weak. And then he tried to go up. And there was an altercation in his car because he wanted to go up and march on the floor with the rioters. He had his children. He had his staffer, every staffer in the White House. He had his lawyers. He had his friends on Fox News telling him to stop this. And yet, what did we find out? He sat and watched this for almost 3 hours in the president's dining room, and he would actually stop and rewind so we could look at the most violent parts. Now, why am I telling you that today? Because there are millions and millions of people who are being told every day by Donald Trump and being told by cable news networks and being told by extremists that this was all much ado about nothing. No, this is the fact of the matter. That this was Donald Trump's America. This is what Donald Trump had brought America to after 4 years. Pretty damn easy to contrast where Joe Biden and the country is today, economically, militarily, socially, and politically, compared to this, Willie.
Somewhere in those pictures, Officer Michael Fanone's being beaten to within an inch of his life and having a stroke because he pleads with those rioters to spare him because he has children. Another cop is being beaten with an American flag. That's all happening in those pictures. That all happened in America based on a lie that Donald Trump shouted with a megaphone, driving those people to the Capitol. And by the way, many of those people he says he will pardon if he is reelected and let them out of prison. Chris Matthews.
Chris Matthews, you've done this before, written speeches for presidents. What does Joe Biden need to do tonight?
Well, he's going to face the enemy. Clearly, we've watched Mitch McConnell, and we've watched Lindsey Graham, and watched Cruz, as you talked about it this morning. Everybody in that audience is MAGA'd up, totally with MAGA. They're all in. They've all agreed to endorse Trump. They're going to be adamantly opposed to anything on the border. Anytime if the president takes any kind of shot at the Republicans for not supporting the deal that they originally were for at their leadership level, he's going to get attacked. It's going to be a brutal night for him. And of course, everybody's going to look and see how he's doing, what kind of vitality he shows. But these guys are in the tank with Trump all the way, and they're going to show it tonight. I think it's going to be like Adam Schiff's victory speech the other night in California. I mean, there's just going to be a lot of heckling. It's going to be very difficult for the president.
You know, Susan, you've written that the president needs to do 5 things. Tell us about those.
Well, some of them are standing up to his opponents, as Chris just said, but one of them is demonstrating his own vigor, his mental acuity. You know, he did that last year with that exchange that you showed part of just a moment ago, where he took advantage of Republican heckling. That he turned that to his advantage last year. A moment like that would serve him well tonight. He also needs to kind of reset where he is on immigration. We now see immigration outdistancing the economy as the issue that is top on voters' minds. And at the moment, Donald Trump has something like a 30-point advantage in handling immigration. President Biden needs to show that he has policies on immigration that will do more to secure the border, and I believe we're going to hear some of that tonight.
You know, Mark, you've written about this town. This is one of the key events in Washington D.C. And what the town does. You never really know how these things are going to go. I can tell you from my personal experience, Bill Clinton came in, and I think the first year he talked about school uniforms. We all laughed. It worked, that line. He said, I think the next year the era of big government is over. We laughed even harder. It connected with a lot of working class and middle class voters. And then he I'm sure you remember this, right in the heat, the peak of the Monica Lewinsky scandal. He went, delivered his State of the Union. Hillary Clinton got a rousing ovation. Bill Clinton got a rousing ovation by Democrats. And again, every time Bill Clinton rose to the occasion, even some of those speeches were so long, I would leave, go into the cloakroom, sleep for 45 minutes, come out, he'd still be going. And I said, this just can't work. But it's so unpredictable. That's really the last big bully pulpit. And Bill Clinton sure figured out a way to make it work for him like Joe Biden did last year. What does Joe Biden need to do this year?
Well, I mean, what's interesting about the State of the Union is it's been a set-piece event for Washington for a long time, and you could kind of predict the laundry list. You could sort of say the president has to do A, B, and C, and he's probably going to talk about A, B, and C. In more recent years, it's become more chaotic and unpredictable, and it has really kind of rewarded a president who can think on his feet. And Biden, can do that, but that sort of couples with the whole, the president has to show vigor, which, in itself becomes a part of the narrative, right? Because, one, Biden hasn't said much publicly, and this has been looked to, and it's like he's been saving up a lot of his message for tonight. And two, I mean, can he parry the unpredictable things that are going to be coming from the audience? Because as we've seen recently, the decorum of letting the president speak and doing, giving him his hour is kind of lost because there's been more heckling recently. There have been more rogue actors in the gallery, and you never know how it's going to look.
And many of those members exist to heckle, whether in this format or on Twitter or wherever else. So there's definitely going to be heckling tonight. I think, despite the request from Speaker Johnson that there not be any outbursts, we'll see. So, Jonathan, let's talk about the objective here for the White House. This is not supposed to be a political speech. This is the annual address about the State of the Union. But it is the biggest audience that the president will have now as we've turned the corner after Super Tuesday to what clearly is a two-man race.
Yeah, it will implicitly be a political speech, even if not overtly one. It's a State of the Union delivered in a re-election year. And Chris Matthews, it comes just 2 days after Donald Trump locked up the GOP nominee. Just needs a few dozen delegates to go to make that official. So how would you recommend Biden deal with the elephant in the room, which is Donald Trump? Should he call him out by name? Does he go after him directly? Or does he talk more obliquely about threats to democracy and try to really create a contrast between himself and his likely November foe?
I wish logic would work, but he could talk about what you've been showing this morning with Mitch McConnell. He said all the right things after January 6th. Everything about the way the police were attacked by this mob, how it was an insurrection, how there was criminality involved. And all that truth came out. Well, where'd that truth go to? If you could somehow bring back that truth of the attacks on the cops and as human beings, the way they were treated in this moment of insurrection, I think he has a moment here to teach people in their own words, really, what they believe themselves, that they were under attack, that they were running for their lives. Not just Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi, but all of them were running. Mitt Romney, I mean, these guys, I wish Mitt Romney was out there speaking tonight, but they're afraid. I think he has to call them out and talk about, get them to get the people to think, who are these people that represent us? Are they leaders? Or are they followers? Are they just following Trump? I wish he could talk to them. I was thinking, the hardest thing about giving a State of the Union is who are you talking to, Joe? I mean, when you talk on television, you sort of know who your audience is. You sort of gotten to know it over years. Who is that person, that woman or man, younger and older? Who is that person you're talking to? It's not 1 billion people. It's not 123 million people like at the Super Bowl. It's somebody you know that's not too smart about the details, but is a smart person. Always overestimate the brains of your audience and underestimate the knowledge they have. So help them a little bit on the knowledge, but speak to them as if they're intelligent. We all know what happened on January 6th. Talk to those people as if it really happened. Remind them it happened. I wouldn't be branching off into 40 different issues in this speech. No. I'd remind them of what our Constitution was a threat, and these people in this audience are going along with the guy who caused the threat. And I know it's going to be tough. He's going to have opposition out there. But he has to talk truth to the American people. If Biden gets reelected, it's because we remember January 6th. I really think it's that. It's not going to be gun control or something else. It's not about the border. Do we remember what these people tried to do and what they support now? Why do these people? They want their jobs so bad they'll do anything. They'll say anything to keep their jobs. And it's just like in Profiles in Courage. They love being U.S. senators. They love it. I understand why they do. But they'll do anything to keep those jobs. And he has to somehow get that truth out. These people in the audience here have been bought and paid for because they love their lifestyle. And somehow talk to them. Now, I don't know whether they'll ever, afterwards, will they even admit what he was talking to, but the American people need to be reminded of January 6th.
You know,